Washington Manley, who was the Premier of Jamaica, went to the United Kingdom to negotiate for Jamaica's independence with a bipartisan team. And as he spoke to the individuals in the colonial office in the United Kingdom, he said that there is no country in the world not currently independent that is more deserving of independence than Jamaica. Because Jamaica at that point in time was a leader within the developing world, had one of the first railway systems, one of the first electricity power systems. And in 1960, the information that Norman Manley would have had suggested that Jamaica was one of the richer developing countries of the world.
That promise and excitement of independence was never realized. The economy went off track beginning of the 1970s and never really fully got the traction that would lead to a kind of development, a kind of prosperity, a kind of growth that people had come to expect would take place. Our research had revealed that this was simply because the government made bad policy choices at critical junctures. That was what led to the idea that government needed to be able to call upon research capacity and advice outside of the government, outside of the public bureaucracy.
Where CAPRI comes in is in bridging that gap. CAPRI is an organization that looks at important questions that affect our society, our economy, our development, and seeks to answer those questions by finding relevant information that are not biased or tainted by politics or special interests. Facts that are needed to make realistic decisions about problems that affect our country.
It's very important that CAPRI maintains its independence from the government, from all political parties, from private sector and other special interest groups, because it's critical that when CAPRI arrives at a policy recommendation based upon its research, there is no question as to the independence of that so that its work can be accepted and can lead to effective implementation. CAPRI is really not in and of itself an implementing agency, but its concern is about effective implementation. And so to get that implementation done, it liaises with all concerned stakeholders. The government is obviously a very critical stakeholder.
We ensure that the research we produce does not collect dust on the shelf, but reaches the right ears. This is how, over the past 10 years, we are able to influence policies in areas such as debt, informal investment scheme, social support, and the mandate for NHT.
The new generation of Jamaicans must take responsibility for things they had no say in, things they did not cause. But we must take responsibility all the same in order to shape a future. We are a few good decisions away from the Jamaica that we want. Join us as we take responsibility for the future of our country.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. In the context of the nation having the third highest homicide rate in the Latin America and the Caribbean region at 56 per 100,000, Augustown's murder rate is 120 per 100,000. As a result of this, it was branded as an example of a poor community with extraordinarily high levels of violence in Jamaica. In 2016, however, there was a dramatic change. Nashatna Bus, Murder-Free 2016 for Augustown, was the Sunday Morning Gleaner headline on January 8, 2017. The how and why of this aberration occurring has brought us here today. I am Monique Graham, a researcher here at CAPRI, and welcome to our public forum on Zero Murders, searching for lessons from 2 decades of anti-violence interventions in Augustown. We are grateful for the UK's Department for International Development, DFID, represented here by Mr. David Osborne, our country representative, for sponsoring the Transforming Citizen Security Yard project. Under this project, we have completed the report on the JCF reform, this evening's report on zero murders in Augustown in 2016, and the report on scamming, gangs, and violence in Montego Bay, which will be launched on September 23rd, 2019. Gratitude is also expressed to the members of the Augustown community who willingly assisted the team during the conducting of the research. To lead the discussion this evening, we have brought together Mr. Fitzbailey, Acting Deputy Commissioner of Police in charge of crime and security, Mr. Tariq Weeks, a research fellow at the Institute of Criminal Justice and Security, Ms. Venetia Phillips, People's National Party Councillor for the Papine Division in St. Andrew Eastern, and Dr. Diana Thorburn, Director of Research here at CAPRI, who will brief us on the findings and recommendations of the report. The evening's proceedings will be moderated by Attorney at Law, Ms. Danielle Andrade. CAPRI is delighted to have you here with us this evening, and we do look forward to a riveting discussion. Thank you.
Good evening. I am the Executive Director of CAPRI, Damian King, the Member of Parliament for this constituency, the Honourable Favour Williams, sends her regrets. She had wanted to be here but has another engagement, and she sent some remarks that she asked us to read. She writes, "First, let me commend CAPRI for the robust research work done in understanding what impact anti-violence interventions have had on the community of Augustown over 2 decades. We look forward to the release of this study and the lessons that we can draw from this work to help the Augustown community in the years ahead. As Jamaica knows, Augustown is a community that is rich with history, having celebrated its 181st birthday as a free community in August 2019. Not many other communities in Jamaica can claim this record. In celebrating its 181st birthday, Augustown honored the legacy of noted spiritual leader Alexander Bedward. Remnants of the church which he founded still testifies to its glory days. The spiritual movement that Bedward led was a source of inspiration for the black population. Against this rich historical backdrop, it is heartrending that Augustown would suffer so much violence, and in particular, gun violence. The effects of this have been to retard the development of the community and to create fear in its residents. Augustown has the advantage of proximity to the Caribbean Region's University and Teaching Hospital. It has the advantage of proximity to the National University, UTEC. And so Augustown is a community that should be vibrant and alive with students from all over Jamaica and foreign countries enjoying the services that Augustown and its residents have to offer. In turn, residents would be assured of a monthly income which would be turned over in the community, helping to boost the economies of the communities in Augustown. Instead, over the last 2 decades, we, collectively, have had to expend enormous man-hours of time and effort cauterizing the effects of gun violence on the community. While the community is not at the point where we can claim sustainable peace, the residents, the churches, the peace builders, the CDC, other civil society entities, and law enforcement are to be commended for their tireless efforts over the years. Without them, the situation in Augustown could have been significantly worse. I say this knowing of the many interventions by many of the groups, especially the peace builders. In a recent survey of Augustown, the top 2 concerns were violence and the need for economic opportunities. They are my top priorities as well. In the recent past, the government has moved to implement crime-fighting technology in Augustown, and to date, there have been positive results that can be built on. With regards to creating opportunities, we commit to redoubling our efforts in completing the Augustown Training Center. Much work is happening, and we anticipate completion in early 2020. In the meantime, we will continue to connect the young people of Augustown with training, jobs, and business opportunities. My commendations again to CAPRI and their team for this analysis. Our job as stakeholders is to take the lessons from this study and use them to ensure lasting peace. I close with a quote from the government's crime plan. Tackling crime and violence requires a national effort, engaging all groups, interests, and communities. All hands must be on deck. Every citizen or visitor must participate in both the responsibilities and benefits of a safe, orderly, and secure nation. This is a fundamental requirement to advance our nation's progress. God bless you and bless Jamaica, land we love. Honorable Favour Williams, Member of Parliament for St. Andrew Eastern.
Ms. Monique Graham, Chair and Researcher at CAPRI, Dr. Damien King, Executive Director, Mr. David Osborne, Country Representative, UK DFID, Dr. Diana Thorburn, Director of Research at CAPRI, Ms. Andrade, Mr. Bailey, Mr. Weeks, and Ms. Phillips. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening to you all. I'm pleased to be in attendance and grateful for the opportunity to bring greetings on behalf of the University of the West Indies at the launch of Zero Murders, Searching for Lessons from 2 decades of anti-violence interventions in Augustown. I would like to take this opportunity to commend CAPRI, which has been doing a stellar job in informing university policy as well as government policy through their various research projects. CAPRI's work is an excellent example of the kind of evidence-based support that the university likes to put forward. We hope to provide continued information of this sort. In fact, the university's mandate for teaching, research, and outreach is put on display through CAPRI and its work. Our AAA strategy, which is access, alignment, and agility, has amongst its goals greater activism and advocacy in an effort to build a better aligned nation and the needs of the society. Another goal is to improve the quality and quantity of research. In the work of CAPRI, we've combined both, where research now informs activism and advocacy, and we're very pleased to be associated with the organization. The findings of the report may paint, for some, a dismal picture of Augustown, but for me, it gives me a GPS as to where we are and where we need to put our next set of goals. The UWI outreach in Augustown would have started as far back as 1976 with the Department of Community Health through Kent Standard and Ruth Hall. But the work of the Township Project, which has become the Mona Social Services, is the current university's primary organ interfacing with the community. Through this entity, we have been able to intervene. The highlight of our work has been outreach throughout all the community in many facets. Notwithstanding the views that there is still work to be done, I believe that hard policing must be complemented by the initiatives that allow dialogue within the community. Issues that are relevant to residents must be at the fore if anti-violence efforts are truly to be effective. In closing, I'd like to charge the university community, as well as the rest of the communities around us, to become more involved in the efforts to rid communities of violence. As a university, where research is one of our founding pillars, we're equipped to design and undertake rigorous research to try and make a difference in our world, to try and make an impact. I encourage government, the police, and other stakeholders to all seek to pursue initiatives that are based on rigorous, obtained research data so that our resources are put to good use. Congratulations to CAPRI in launching today's report, and I look forward to the discussion as it unfolds. Good evening.
All right, I'll keep it short and just say, honoured guests, good evening. So thank you very much for the opportunity to give some opening remarks. My name is David Osborne. I'm the head of the UK Department for International Development, based here in Kingston, Jamaica. So I'm not going to say too much. Just start with saying, I think most of us here, hopefully all of us, would agree that violence is Jamaica's #1 development problem, if not one of the top development challenges. And if you disagree, consider that Jamaica's homicide rate, Jamaica's homicide rate is higher than that of Iraq, Libya, and Somalia. There's general consensus that violence costs around 5 to 7% of GDP. And simply put, that means that if violence had been contained at global average levels, Jamaica would already be a high-income developing country, a high-income country. So as this paper states, enormous sums of money have been spent by government and donors alike on anti-violence efforts without adequate interventions if you judge the investments on the macro data. Levels of violence have not significantly been altered at the country level. My department has funded this research and a series of forthcoming CAPRI papers on violence in Jamaica because we feel that there's a critical need for independent analysis and evidence-based debate on Jamaica's efforts to reduce violence. We need to know what works and what doesn't. It's disappointing, but perhaps not surprising to see that we lack the evidence to know really what happened in Augusttown. I think this is an issue that all of us funding and delivering interventions need to immediately rectify. We must ensure that professional monitoring and evaluation is a part of every intervention, and if we don't do that, we should stop. DFID will take this challenge seriously. We're working with the Violence Prevention Alliance, who are helping Jamaica develop violence-related injury monitoring systems. We continue to support the Jamaica Crime Observatory, and we hope that the government's newly announced Violence Prevention Commission will play an important role in this space as well. Whilst we can't say for sure why things worked out the way they did in Augusttown, I want to take a moment to briefly reflect on what we have learned generally from other studies nationally in Jamaica. We know from independent evaluation that violence interruption works. Brave, committed people intervene in gang disputes and are negotiating peaceful outcomes every day. They have delivered sustained ceasefire agreements in 40% of targeted communities. That is an incredible record. They've had a significant impact on reducing levels of violence. We also know, again from evaluation, that efforts to identify and divert people away from violent gangs work. One program that we co-fund, CSJP, which many of you know, has achieved a 40% success rate in reducing clients' risk of engaging in violent gangs. And you might think that 40% doesn't sound too impressive. I know that when I did my exams back in the day, my parents would have told me off for a 40% result. But think about the fact that a similar program in New York is well thought of for the fact that it has a 14% success rate. 40% is good because this work is very hard. People are working with young adults who've been failed for years, who have drug addiction problems, mental health problems, who've often been victims of violence themselves for years. For me, when I read the report, I thought perhaps the main message is about the lack of evidence. And it will take time to build that evidence, and we need to take that challenge seriously. But in the meantime, perhaps faster progress on violence reduction could be made if we use the evidence that we do have where it's available to inform new funding decisions. Where interventions like violence interruption and diversion of at-risk youth are proven to work, they need to be delivered at scale over a long time period in a focused and a coordinated manner if we're to have an impact on national violence rates. That's our opinion. You'll have your own. And we hope that today's discussion and the subsequent papers and discussions produced and led by CAPRI will go some way to help promote that evidence-based debate that we need to develop a consensus in Jamaica about the way forward. Thank you very much.
No question is so difficult to answer as that to which the answer appears obvious. George Bernard Shaw. My name is Dana Thorburn. I'm the Director of Research at CAPRI, and I'm going to be sharing with you this evening the report that we did, the research that we did in Augustown on zero murders. When in 2016, Augustown experienced zero murders, all of Jamaica stood up and paid attention. Like many similar vulnerable, poor, violent communities, Augustown had endured decades of seemingly intractable violence and murder. As much as Augustown gets a disproportionate amount of attention, when there are so many other violence-plagued communities across Jamaica, this was a remarkable turn. If Augustown could end its murder problem, then perhaps surely other similar communities could too. Hence the obvious question, how did it happen? And importantly, can it be replicated? Could Augustown have found the solution to extreme violence that Jamaica has been longing for? What we learned was far from the obvious answer that we thought we would find. We uncovered three hypotheses. First is what we call the conventional wisdom. This is what is put forward by the media, is spoken about by many of the stakeholders, where the community came together, proactively fought for peace through promoting community unity and dialogue and mediation. The second hypothesis emerged during the course of our research. We have not otherwise heard it widely articulated, that the most virulent violence producers were physically not present in the community in 2016. And the would-be violent actors, namely the vulnerable young men in the community, were intensively and aggressively case managed by social workers during that period, which may have forestalled their carrying out violent acts. The one that we were least able to evidentiate, hypothesis 3, but which has to be included because it is the explanation that some well-informed, high-level stakeholders hold to, is that there were no murders in Augustown in 2016 because the principal violence producers and controllers deliberately orchestrated the peace for their own benefit. Violence in Augustown, the high murder rate, is attributed to the actions of virulent violence producers who are affiliated with established gangs and whose murderous activities are most often related to the gang in one way or another. In most, if not all, violent communities throughout Jamaica, what we today call gang warfare is carried out by a relatively small number of highly active offenders and is the direct descendant of organized political violence that originated in the late 1940s, has a long history. Augustown was a particularly concentrated den of political violence. Over 3 decades, districts were divided into political gang turfs. Politically motivated killings and gang wars characterized the violence and accounted for most murders in Augustown, with heightened tension around elections. The nature of armed violence in Jamaica and in Augustown has since evolved. There's been a decline in politically motivated murders and political violence in general since 2002. The gangs may and do have political affiliations, particularly in Augustown, and gang violence and murders continue, but they are no longer related to national politics. We can say that with certainty. What this has left us with is a pattern of homicidal violence that is largely attributed to inter-gang and intra-gang violence, mostly related to wars over turf, both physical and criminal enterprise related, power struggles including internal hierarchical disputes, reprisals, and money. If we look at the pattern over the last 11 years, we can see how this bears out. The murders that are uncategorized here are generally assumed to be gang-related. This is before they started to categorize the murders the way that they did starting 2011. You can see there's no identifiable pattern or trend here, which is why 2016 is such an outlier, as you can see just looking at the chart. I do need to make one disclaimer. There was a man who was gravely injured, shot in 2016. He died in 2017. His death is counted in the 2017 numbers. So it's debatable whether there were really 0 murders in 2016. Another blip on here is also significant. That little gray number, 1, in 2015, was a criminally motivated murder, thought to be. It was supposed to have been a robbery, even though nothing was actually stolen. This was the murder of a JUTC bus driver, not from Augustown, no relationship to the community besides driving the bus carrying Augustown citizens in and out of the community. And this is a particularly shocking murder, particularly for the residents of Augustown. And this is thought to have been the catalyst for the efforts that Hypothesis 1 says accounted for 0 murders in 2016. But those efforts, the Hypothesis 1, have to be understood in the context of 20 years, over 20 years of anti-violence and peace interventions in the community. So that renewed sense of urgency that the bus driver's murder brought about at the end of 2015 were not new efforts. They have to be understood as having been based in these many decades of efforts going back. And Augustown, we weren't able to prove this empirically, but we suspect that on a per capita basis, Augustown perhaps has one of the highest rates of investment in interventions in any community in Jamaica. Beginning with their own collective efforts within the community, Augustown has had dozens of violence reduction and intervention programs, formal and informal, direct and indirect, primary, secondary, tertiary level, carried out by a host of state and non-state actors and donor partners. These efforts and interventions began as an organic response by local stakeholders and community members in the early 1990s, began to be formalized in 1993 with the establishment of the Peace Builders Group and the Augustown Sports and Community Development Foundation. In the 2000s, external interventions proliferated and more local groups cropped up. Almost all interventions have been carried out by more than one group, working with each other, state and non-state actors. There were attempts at improving people's economic circumstances through income generating and employment creation programs. There was parenting training. There was peace building via sports, as just a few examples. But the key intervention prioritized by many of local community groups and their external partners was violence interruption through dialogue and mediation. The challenge with identifying which of these interventions worked, however, is the absence of systematic monitoring and evaluation of the interventions. So we do not definitively know what effect they had, if any, on the objectives they sought to achieve. As a prime example, mediation efforts were what led to the famous 2008 Peace Treaty, when the Peace Management Initiative, the Augustown Peace Builders, the police, and others brought warring gang leaders together to negotiate a peace agreement. It was the first of its kind in Jamaica and grabbed the country and the world's attention in very much the same way that 0 murders has grabbed our attention today. Whether that truce succeeded in bringing peace to Augustown is debatable. If you recall the bar chart, you will see that there was a dip in murder following 2008, reaching a low in 2011 of 4 murders, but then it went back up. And it has then since fluctuated from year to year. There are academic papers, international organization reports, news articles to this day proclaiming the peace treaty's success. But other research, including a rigorous statistical analysis, concluded that the homicide pattern in Augustown after 2008 could not be traced to the truce. These 2 decades of interventions, particularly those focusing on community building, violence interruption, and mediation, should be and are considered the foundation of the efforts that comprise the first hypothesis explaining 0 murders. That the peace was a result of community unity, proactive community efforts to end violence, primarily through mediation and mediation-adjacent events and strategies. And so we come to 2016. According to this hypothesis, the events leading to 0 murders in 2016 began in 2015, when the Sizzler Youth Foundation, together with the Peace Builders and the Member of Parliament, staged an extensive celebration of Augustown's emancipation anniversary with the explicit goal of achieving a murder-free year. They organized corner meetings, sought to involve the whole community in the planning of a month-long set of events that August. Each corner was given the resources to hold parties and stage shows, which provided for interaction between the districts. This appeared to have a positive effect on gang behavior and to have created a sense of community as different groups celebrated with each other. Thus, the mobilization around the JUTC driver's murder serendipitously had its precursor in these deliberate attempts to end violence. The Augustown Peace Builders and the then Inspector of Police in Augustown formed a committee going into 2016, following a peace march that the day after the JUTC bus driver's murder, with representatives from Mona Social Services, Social Development Commission, the churches, ordinary citizens. They held weekly meetings at the police station every Tuesday at 8 a.m. The Member of Parliament and the Councillor were clearly in full support. The primary goal of these was to stimulate dialogue between those who wanted peace, which was virtually everyone in Augustown, and the warring gang factions. Subsequent to that, corner meetings, which is a staple of mediation and dialogue in Augustown, were reintroduced, organized by the committee together with the Sizzler Youth Foundation. Committee members would talk to the corner crews, the corner gangs, and the criminal gangs with a view to convincing them to solve their conflicts through mediation instead of violence. With many of the major dons and influential high-impact violence producers incarcerated in 2016, ordinary gang members seemed more open to dialogue and appeared to participate in the discussions. There were other occurrences in 2016, however, one which I just mentioned. The fact that the key violence producers were not in the community is considered by some as a real explanation for why there were 0 murders in 2016, regardless of the corner meetings and the other attempts at mediation. Their absence concurred with intensive case management of would-be violence producers, young men who were identified as susceptible to being drawn into gang violence and who were targeted by social workers for much of that year. For some of these young men, this interaction with these social workers was the only sustained attention that they were getting in most of their lives. This hypothesis is bolstered by the fact that almost immediately upon the return of the key gangsters to the community, Augustown returned to its previous patterns of murder within just a few weeks of the start of 2017. The implication of this hypothesis is thus that violence and murder correlate to the presence or absence of high-impact violent offenders in the community, a correlation which is well established in the literature and not necessarily with violence intervention efforts. Hypothesis 3 is yet to be fully interrogated, but the implications of this hypothesis are disturbingly sinister and suggest that Augustown's violence problem, and likely that of similar communities across Jamaica, is impervious to interventions. There is even the suggestion that the senior violence controllers manipulated the interventions themselves. One senior police officer who knew Augustown well told us, with regard to the various interventions, the same players are calling the shots as to who gets what. They are benefiting from what is taking place and can still disturb the peace at any time. I started with a quote, "No question is so difficult to answer as that to which the answer appears obvious." And so it was with the original, apparently obvious question about what worked in Augustown to get to 0 murders. In the absence of rigorous evidence on the interventions, the most we can say about hypothesis 1 is that the community's anti-violence efforts may have played a role, but such efforts generally do not have long-lasting effects. And in this case, where they were not sustained, if 0 murders was the outcome of those efforts, the results were short-lived. At the same time, it is logical to conclude that 0 murders occurred because, as per hypothesis 2, many of the most lethal violence producers were not in the community carrying out their regular homicidal activity. It is also possible that both factors, the intensive efforts at mediation and community unity, and the temporary absence of the high-impact violent actors, resulted in an increased traction of the mediation efforts with the junior violence producers, who may have been more approachable and more easily convinced to hold back from violent action. Hypothesis 3, that influential gangsters deliberately held back on violent activity in order to suit their own personal, commercial, and criminal interests, came to the fore more recently, after we had done the research for the report and we did not probe it. But it is extremely significant because its promulgation is an important indicator of the low value that key stakeholders and decision makers place on mediation and violence interruption as effective strategies. Lessons learned, however, there were, and important ones, that can and should inform anti-violence initiatives in Augustown and throughout Jamaica's vulnerable violence-plagued communities. We start with law enforcement and the role of the criminal justice system and its agents. In Augustown, and certainly in many similar communities, the police are not able to build cases because the citizens do not trust them to provide evidence. While this is, of course, not unique to Augustown, it is especially pertinent there. The focus then should be on continuing to build a relationship between the police and the community towards engendering greater trust through continuous implementation of community policing elements and more service-oriented policing. Particularly given that the physical absence of violence producers correlates with fewer murders, emphasis has to be placed on building the necessary trust so that witnesses come forward to give evidence, to build cases which can be prosecuted in order to humanely and justicially remove the most virulent, high-impact violence producers from the community. Related to this is the role of overseas actors in Augustown's violence problem. During the course of our research, we learned that Augustown's overseas gang affiliates play a powerful role in the violence in the community. Together with our foreign security partners, we need to get much more information that can be used to understand this relationship so that these ties and flows of information, directives, money, and weapons between the US and Augustown can be severed or at least disrupted. We have to change the way we do anti-violence interventions. All interventions of any sort must be evidence-based, have built-in, scientific, transparent, rigorous evaluation mechanisms from the inception of the intervention. Sustainability must be a priority. Interventions are best built on existing collective citizen efficacy, which is very strong in Augustown, with support for local organizations in capacity building, governance training, leadership training, and succession planning. One evidence-based intervention that is well suited for Augustown is restorative justice. And while it was attempted there, it was thwarted by logistical problems. Restorative justice should be a priority intervention for Augustown going forward. Finally, there has to be a consensus among the stakeholders, from the state security apparatus and the relevant NGOs and CBOs on violence interruption and mediation. The discord that currently exists, where one group of stakeholders is advocating and carrying out these types of interventions, at the same time as other very important stakeholders are skeptical at best of these strategies, is counterproductive, it sends mixed signals, and it creates gaps which violence producers exploit and benefit from. There are no obvious answers to Jamaica's violence problem, but we will continue to spin our wheels and progress slowly, if at all, unless we can adopt a more coherent approach to ending crime that is insulated from partisan politics and where interventions are based on evidence-supported programs that build on community efficacy and are implemented with a view to long-term sustainability. We cannot continue to spend precious time and scarce resources without knowing what the outcomes are and expect to bring about any change in this Jamaica's most serious problem. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please, panelists, I welcome you to the stage. My name is Daniel Andrade, all protocols observed. I'm an attorney by profession, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. Augustown is a community that has a history of violence, but is also a community that has a long history of social interventions and citizens working towards addressing this issue of violence and striving for peace. For your listening pleasure, we have 4 distinguished panelists who have joined me on the stage, and those are Mr. Fitz Bailey, Acting Deputy Commissioner of Police for the Jamaica Constabulary Force, Mr. Tariq Weeks, who is a research fellow with the Institute of Criminal Justice and Security, Ms. Venetia Phillips, the People's National Party Councillor for the Papine Division in Eastern St. Andrew, and Dr. Diana Thorburn, Director of Research for CAPRI. So the rules for today. Each panelist will first have up to 5 minutes to share their remarks on this issue, and then we will have a question and answer segment. I will ask if you're interested in posing a question, that you please raise your hand. There are ushers who will come to you. They have a mic. And please, let us all get a chance to share the floor. Give everyone a chance to ask a question who is interested in doing so. All right? Thank you. Please welcome our panelists. Who's going to go first? I think we'll go with you first. All right, so you don't have to stand. You can sit if you want. But I think first we will invite on my right Mr. Fitz-Bailey to first give his opening remarks, and then we'll flow towards his left, towards the rest of the panelists. Please, okay. Mr. Bailey. If you want, you can, you have a mic, so if you want to sit, you can sit. If you feel more comfortable standing, it's up to you.
Okay, I'll sit. Let me recognize our special guest, moderator, and the rest of the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I happen to have the divisional commander for St. Andrew Central between the period 2012 to 2015. When I took over command for that division, I had an unfortunate baptism. And that was on the 14th of February, 2014, when we had an incident where 9 persons were shot, including a baby. This didn't take place in Augustown. It took place in Nannyville. And for those of us who understand St. Andrew Central, whatever happens in Nannyville affects Augustown and Standpipe. My team and I made a commitment then that what happened in Nannyville would never happen again within the division. And I'll get back to that later. In 2012, as you saw the data that was presented, we had 11 murders in Augustown. The team of officers from St. Andrew Central took a deliberate, or create a deliberate strategy in treating with violence in Augustown. At that time, we had curfews, we had all type of initiatives. I had to be there trying to rein in some of my officers in terms of how they're related to the citizens. And I want to commend Ms. Phillips, who was there as a support, and all the other political representatives. And when I listened to the result of and the analysis that was given, whereby the reduction in murder in Augustown is as a result of a number of variables. One, community involvement. We had the builders, the peace builders. We worked very closely. The church and other NGOs, including restorative justice. We embarked jointly on several initiatives, including walkthrough, including corner meetings, and a critical element to any successful initiative is to gain the respect of the citizens within the particular community or space. It does make sense we try to change the behavior unless we first respect the citizens and also respect self. So that element of trust was very important in our effort to reduce the violence in Augustown. So if you look from 2013, you saw that there was a gradual reduction. 2014, and I want to say that 2014 was not only a reduction, we never saw just a reduction in Augustown, but the entire St. Andrew Central, we had a reduction of murder by 46% within the division. And that was a deliberate effort in terms of our community involvement, etc. And then in 2015, something that I consider to be unprecedented, and again, it's joint community effort. We invited, our target was the men. We invited the men to a meeting at St. Andrew Central. 26 men from Augustown provided their own transport, came to St. Andrew Central, where we had a sit-down. That was followed up with another meeting at the Open Bible Church, where 76 men came together, and we had a sit-down and discuss some of the issues that they were confronted with in Augustown. I left St. Andrew Central in 2015, somewhere about August. And then it was not surprising that in 2016, and I know the effort continued, we saw that significant reduction in murder. I quoted and I made reference to Nannyville, and we may say that we are dealing with Augustown alone. But in Nannyville, if you look at the data in Nannyville, my time is up. Nannyville, basically between 2013 to current, is almost, there were 2 years when there was zero violence in Nannyville. And I just close by saying, what obtained in Nannyville, and I think it's something that needs to be looked at. Nannyville, they created structure. For example, if you are going to have any form of entertainment activity in Nannyville, a committee was set up, and you have to route that through the committee, which is headed by a justice of the peace. The other, community groups, Senior Citizens Association, and a number of other community groups were actually set up in Nannyville. So I think if we are going to sustain what obtained in Augustown, we have to ensure that the appropriate structure is created.
Okay. Thank you for those remarks. Please, Ms. Venetia Phillips.
Thank you, moderator. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me move quickly just by saying all protocols observed. Let me thank CAPRI for this very timely research and very critical one, also the UK for their assistance in funding this research. I have been associated with Augustown since the 1980s, late 1980s, and now I'm the counselor there. So pretty much, without giving away my age, most of my youth was spent with some kind of relationship in Augustown. In 1992, violence reared its ugly head in Augustown. And since that, I have seen myriad of different forms of interventions across that community from all different types of stakeholders. And what we have seen in the run-up to 2016 is like nothing we had ever seen before. Sometimes when we speak about crime in Augustown, it is really one that leads to some very unpleasant facts. And the reality is that the multiple stakeholders, which includes community members, law enforcement, and of course the University of the West Indies, as well as external agencies, we saw a manipulation of those agencies and the different groups by criminal elements across the community. The basis of crime in Augustown, this report accurately recorded and confirmed that law enforcement, in association with community groups, really helped to produce the results that we saw in 2016, and also accounts for the fluctuation that we have seen over time. The basis for crime in Augustown has never ever been actually stated because there's no one explanation for the violence we've seen over different years. It started with politics, but it graduated to gang violence. And that is because times would have changed, resources became available to the players on the ground, and so they no longer needed the politicians. There were several initiatives from the political directorate in the early years Ed Bartlett, for example, would have taken an approach where he decided that he was never going to deal directly with the guys on the corner. So he implemented sports in the community and worked around the criminal elements in the community at that time. Post Ed Bartlett, we saw Percy Broderick who came in, and then we had a lot of political violence. Then it was during that period that you had most of the political violence in Augustown. When we had Colin Campbell coming in, so I'm giving you that backdrop, mindful of the clock, against the background that the violence in Augustown that we experienced in the run-up to 2016 changed face, essentially. And so, because I was present, I kind of understood the nature of what was happening there. So, coming into the Colin Campbell and Percy Broderick era, into the St. Aubin Bartlett, before we had Andre Hilton, there was again increased violence activities. And if you look at the figures that predated the one CAPRI gave, you will see that. Much of that was politically motivated, and so the political organizations were not in a position to effectively help to reduce crime then. And so much of it was left to the police as the citizens were fearful. When Dr. St. Aubin Bartlett took over and Andre Hilton, essentially, there was a move to get this, to break the political tribalism that existed. And we saw some initiatives there that bore fruit. All along, the police and the community had been struggling to keep the community together until Dr. Bartlett and Andre Hilton came in and started working in the initial stages before the Sizzler Youth Foundation actually got into being. You had players who are now peacemakers who were a part of the violence. And so that's a plus for the community. Because some of the critical players, like even Sizzler himself, who could have been considered part of the issues that we had in the earlier parts, maturity took over. And he has in turn turned that around into something positive for the community and has been working to sustain peace. Through initiatives and the growth of social organizations in the community, what we saw was that there was this kind of no-nonsense mood right across. The churches, if we're to be honest, they were from the very onset, from 1992 all the way in to now, they have always been a part of the community, fighting to rid the community of crime. There were outstanding community members prior to them forming the Peace Builders who were always trying to bring peace across the community. And so I believe there are a number of groups to be credited. The report is a very good report and a very intense report in that it captures most of the areas and it does so accurately. I know that we are tempted to pat ourselves on the back to say, you know, this group did it or that group did it. But the truth be told is that the report actually accounts for the fact that even though there has been intense and continuous community involvement in the process, that the role of law enforcement cannot in any way be discounted. Because when there was extraction from the space of some of the key perpetrators, we saw that very critical dip. And so fast forward to 2015, and I know I'm watching the clock, in 2015, we had violent exchanges all the way up to December 31st. And you would have heard Dr. Thorburn say that as a matter of fact, someone was shot in December 2015, I think somewhere around the 30th or the 31st, but died 3 days into 2017. So where we put that is a matter of debate. But the reality is that, you know, we had a very challenging 2015, but thank God we had no fatalities in 2016, because that is actually the reality. 0 fatalities. If you want to call them 0 murders, we welcome that because we're seeking hope. Because hope is what will get us to the next point. But the reality is that the efforts have been tireless, the investments have been enormous, and the reality is that the spirit of the community is there. Sometimes, because we're human, it would fluctuate. But the reality is we have to thank the police, we have to thank community members who have been resilient, but we also have to get to that place where we have done, social intervention will never be able to cease, but we also have to be able to separate those things that will allow us to get to the heart of the problem. We cannot paper tape it. We are going to have to deal with it in a way that will get us to a point where we are really talking about zero murders. But I commend all the stakeholders and I thank CAPRI for a very intensive research.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. And now we will hear remarks from Mr. Weeks on my left. Please.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for being part of, well, CAPRI, thank you very much for being part of this discussion. Like everyone else, I follow and commending you on your effort to bring some direction to this violence prevention discourse in Augustown. And I won't be repeating much of what person said before, but I want to use the content of the report and the findings and recommendations that Dr. Soban has articulated to talk about the importance of what I call loosely issues of standardization and our attempts to deal with crime and violence in Jamaica. So very quickly, given the enduring gang-related activity we have in Jamaica, I think it would be useful if we arrive at some consensus regarding how we choose to define and support or report, social groupings that engage in violence. The JCF has a classification, and we have had contributions from both sociological and anthropological work. I see Mr. Levy over here. But I think also we have a legal definition. And we need to get to the point to provide the data, give the JCF the resources that it needs to provide the data or bring the data forward that will support the legal definition. I put this forward because the discourse in this report, as well as what we've heard over the years, recognizes the importance of community, the contribution of community crews, defense crews. I'm hearing issues of a subtype of corner gangs. And we understand this, but we need to move a little bit further in trying to understand what is it exactly in terms of the number of gangs we have operating in Augustown and what we have in Jamaica as well. I think if we could get the evidence to support that legal definition, we'll be in a position to also understand now what is the inclusive and exclusive arrangements that are going on at the community level regarding these particular groups. So I'm making my points here specifically on issues that this report has done so well in sort of laying the foundation for us to talk about regarding Augustown, as well as issues related to Jamaica. So we need to define what constitutes a criminal gang and the membership estimates. These are very controversial, and so I know it's a tough task, but it's critical for us to design interventions, deployment of resources, and most important, we need to get our prosecutions up. We can have a number of interventions, we can do a number of activities, the police can do a lot of community policing activities, but if we don't get the prosecutions up regarding gangs, we are going to be in trouble, and we're going to have a recycling of the problem. In 2010, we had 258 gangs. We moved somewhere up to 313. We came back down to 200-something. Last year, we had 200-something gangs again. Resources, Augustown has had 6 gangs from my own data collection. We've had about 6 criminal gangs in that community. But we also have a lot of community crews as well, as I've mentioned. The 2 points I've raised so far, in keeping with how criminal gangs have been approached, that's countrywide, but there are also accompanying cultural changes that I want us to be cognizant of whilst we talk about Augustown and nationally what it is in terms of lessons that we need to learn. We're not just talking about the reorganizing and the organizing of units and police units, but we also need to see police reform. We've had high and low murder counts, right, for almost a decade. We've seen them fluctuate, but we have not had police reform. In Augustown, the police activity there, and I put it very loosely, police activity there, has seen a number of interventions, a number of innovations come through, right? Some of which have been mentioned here. But we have not seen, we have not seen some stable, fair deployment of resources treating that community, right? We have not seen that type of change that we want to see regarding how it is that these interventions interpair, interact with a police force that is now reformed and is embracing a type of culture in terms of co-producing the security and what it is that needs to go in that environment. My last point on standardization also features itself as a problem in the scaling up of what works. One of the things that I've been questioning, and I see some people here, Kenneth is here, and I see other persons here regarding this peace building initiative. If the peace builders have benefited from violence interruption training, violence interruption inside Damien is not here, but PMI has been involved in the community. Why isn't that the Peace Builder Group has not matured into a violence interruption program in the more structured and formal sense? Why is it we have not gone that way? They've been around for a number of decades. But we're getting the evidence now that says that the VI program in Jamaica has had its benefits and produced some remarkable outcomes. So maybe it's time we consider, in terms of the lessons work discussion, what do we do if a peace building program that has existed so long in a community that has shown promising results and innovations and interventions for the last decade. This report, in particular, has brought to light experiences of unfairness in police operations, which I spoke about already, so I won't waste too much time on that. But I'm very interested in a picture that has police reform with all of these interventions from the university, PMI, everywhere else, right? And I'm also interested at best in an environment where there's police reform accompanying at best police reform accompanying police interventions that have been rigorously evaluated. So I think I wrote that wrong. So yes. So what I'm saying is that I would like to see, in terms of a minimum, police reform, and then secondly, as a gold standard, police reform accompanying rigorously evaluated interventions, right? Across different jurisdictions that I've looked at where gangs and homicides are a problem, police reform is always featuring, right? It's always there ticking on the policymakers and decision makers' agenda. Very quickly, in terms of time, I think that based on the research I've done in the last 2 years in Augustown, we need to look at issues of the long criminal histories that are present in the community. We need to disband the structures that facilitate and protect criminality in that community. Criminal activity in Augustown has endured, right, despite different interventions. So we need to talk about, that's why I'm signaling police reform and other interventions. And I've also seen and recognized that criminal gangs have become more organized and professional, right, whilst all of these tactics are going on. There's a hypothesis put forward in Dr. Throbbon's presentation, which I can see in terms of the reorganization of power in Augustown since the death of some key players, right, between 2012 and 2015, right? How does that reorganization of power feature in this new gang dynamic in Augustown? And what lessons can we learn from the reorganization, how these groups reorganize in terms of going forward and what kind of interventions we want there. We need some quick lessons as well from coordination, violence prevention, and crime reduction, right? This is something that I see in Augustown, having been in there for almost a decade, right? What are the quick lessons that we can gather from coordination and violence intervention and reduction? We also need to not forget women in the violence prevention discourse. That's a key thing coming out from Augustown. Women in the leadership of violence prevention, safer spaces campaigns are either non-existent or very few in the leadership positions. If you look through, right, how long has Kenneth been at them, right? Kenneth has done a lot of work, but we need to see some women participate. How do we get that sort of inclusive environment in a community like Augustown? The next thing, quickly, not everyone in a criminal gang or armed group in the community is there because they want to be there. Right? The research we did in the last year suggests to us that people are blessed into criminal gangs in the community. People are also pressured into it. And we also understand that whilst the corner plays a very important socializing role, it can also have positive and negative influences. And that's covered a lot in the literature as well on gangs and how they interface in different spaces. But we want to be able to reconfigure, right, or repurpose these particular corner groups, not losing what it is they're intentionally supposed to do, but also to ensure that the pro-social attitudes and behaviors and the resilience that we want in people, especially our young people, comes out or is reinforced at that corner level. In a recently concluded study of the Violence Prevention Alliance with Augustown as a research community, this was something that actually was reinforced. And my last point is that surveillance of threats to community safety and security has to shift from just the obvious groups driving the disorder to other groups and individuals who benefit from the fluidity, right, of being a gang member today and just a network or a link tomorrow, right? So we need to pay attention not to the obvious groups alone in the community, but as well as to the ones that are moving in and out. Gang literature, gang work has moved out of recognizing that, you know, these are just family systems or systems that are filling structural holes. We're moving to discussions now of network analytics on gangs and how is it that we can now talk about this conversation in August time because it has matured way past that, right? It has matured to a level where we understand, DCP mentioned it, there are sister community relationships not based on political affiliations, but as well as much on the networks that are existing amongst. We all live in a social media environment. We understand the importance of networks, right? We know how it works, right? This is what is happening on the ground. So I think that we in terms of lessons, coordination is at the top of my agenda, right? How do we coordinate between interventions? How do we ensure comprehensiveness? Comprehensiveness is not just about the multiplicity of programs addressing violence intervention, but it's also about comprehensiveness in terms of integration. How well do programs in those communities hand over to others based on their own limitations? So CAPRI comes in, provides the research, it drives a process. SDC picks it up, it drives another process. Seamlessly, how are these helping move us to a particular outcome? So Augustown's interventions have to move to this type of focus. Thank you very much. Sorry, I had a lot. I'm very sorry.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weeks. A mouthful, but insightful as well. And I would like to invite Diana, if you want to respond, if you want to use your 5 minutes to respond to anything that was said by the other panelists, or if you have anything to share with your 5 minutes.
No, I think we should just start with questions so that we make best use of the time. And anything that comes up, we can take in the question and answer.
Very well. All right, I see some hands up already, and our ushers. I think I saw this gentleman in the middle, his hand up first.
Yes. Maureen Seymour.
Mr. Seymour.
Maureen Seymour.
Mr. Seymour. Mr. Seymour, yes.
Let me thank you for the rich research which you have done. But I didn't hear any recommendations that would begin to get at the problem. And it seems that we're treading water. But I did hear from Assistant Commissioner Bailey and from Dr. Thorburn what the problem might be. Assistant Commissioner Bailey cautioned us not to proceed without looking at the nexus between Standpipe, Nannyville, and Augustown. And Dr. Thorburn took us through a number of hypotheses. I think we have to look at some fresh approaches and stop looking at dance. We have to look at some fresh approaches for managing what I would like to describe as Mona Valley, which Commissioner has described for you, which is that area running from Augustown all the way to Standpipe down to Nannyville, and to decide how we're going to manage this area going in the future. Now, in 1972, when I went to Detroit, the people had to be sleeping with the guns under the bed, and that frightened me. But today, Detroit, in response to that problem, have orchestrated a new strategy of high-definition security cameras, broadband internet, designated locations, which could be put in Mona Valley, with face recognition technology to pick up like what happened this morning with the busman turning across the pedestrian, to pick up things that as they happen so you can respond in real time. That's going to take investment. So the question is, how do you pay for it? Think of what I call getting the government to agree to make Mona Valley an assessment district. That is to say, the people who benefit from the public investment will be asked to put money back into the system so you can pay for police, pay for the community groups that work, and to begin to drive out of the community those elements that you do not want.
Okay, and so we have an interesting question there. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to it or if we should continue.
I think that there is definitely a role for technology throughout Jamaica. And my understanding is that these things are starting to be implemented, and we're going to be seeing more and more of them going forward. But I think for Augustown, for two reasons. One, because of the geographic layout of Augustown, there are going to be limits to the technology. That's just a reality because of the way the topography is shaped. But I think the second thought that comes to mind when you say that is that there are still some very human issues in Augustown that need to be resolved and worked on that no amount of technology is going to be able to fix or take the place of. We're talking about building trust between the police and the citizens, building trust between the groups themselves, among citizens, among each other. There's a very small community. Many people are related. You have brothers killing brothers in Augustown. Technology is not going to help that.
May I just also add, though, that one of the things just to inform you, by the way, we have already started that process. We do have cameras now being put up across Augustown. So that is already in train. And Dr. Torburn alluded to it just now, but please be mindful that almost, correct me, Assistant Commissioner, but 50% of the murders we experience in Augustown, certainly in the last couple of years, have been domestic. And so that in and of itself opens up a whole new conversation in terms of culture and just how we deal with conflict resolution in the community.
Can I just add very quickly to that? I can see the role of technology, like Dr. Saban said, in terms of assisting us with getting that type of swift response we want, right? In terms of the deterrent effect, deterrent effects generally, we want to see where we have that police response being very swift, and certainly persons can understand that the risk of committing a particular act will be met very quickly with a response that takes them before the justice system. I think also that we have to pay attention, and Ms. Phillips mentioned it, we have to pay attention to the culture of violence in Augustown. The 2017 data, although it may seem like an outlier, is very important. It points us to something that people are not resolving their conflicts amicably, right? So to concentrate only on gang-related problems, right, would be a misadventure in terms of what we want to do. We need to first address alongside the gangs this culture of aggression. Let me not use violence, but a culture of aggression, and how people choose to respond to that in the community.
Okay, thank you. And I saw the gentleman in the back, in the black, and then we have Mr. Hilton and a gentleman in pink, and then we have a gentleman here in the front.
All protocols observed. My question is to Mr. Fitz Bailey and Mr. Tariq Weeks. In your research, did you find a correlation between turf war and the retailing of cannabis sativa?
Sorry, was that?
Turf war, and could you repeat, please, for the panelists?
Did you find a correlation between turf war, because I don't know what turf war is or how turf war starts, and the retailing of cannabis sativa?
Retailing
of cannabis. The selling of weed. Okay.
So who wants to go first?
All right. Please,
That's a
ACP.
very difficult question. I have not seen any relationship in terms of violence based on my own, not research, but experience.
So I think we can say, though, I mean, turf wars come about because of rivalries over selling spaces, extortion spaces, any spaces where money can be made. And money is being made, economic interest, and there's an economic interest in selling ganja. So whereas we may not have pinpointed that one specifically, I think we can safely say that competition over retail of ganja is going to lead to wars. One of the interesting things about Augustown is how much of the violence doesn't seem to even have a real motive at the end of the day. Yes. When you look at it, there seems to be this cycle, this reprisals, these turf wars that to the outsider make no sense. Yeah. They're completely illogical.
I think it's about more recognition than anything else. I want a certain level of recognition, so I'm going to mete out violence within a particular space.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that very quickly on that, I've not seen, I mean, the last 2 years doing work in Augusta, I've not seen a relationship with the turf wars and retailers of cannabis. But certainly, the wars that have existed in Augustown that I've been able to document are linked to what I call status management. And that is linked to the power basis, that's linked to the economic basis, that's linked to simple internal struggles, right? And how do people within, or across gangs and within gangs manage that status? We have guys like she mentioned, brothers who kill each other. One brother smiled too much for an opposite group of allies or friends, and he ends up dead. So status management is what I call it, in terms of how people are going about these turf wars in Augustown.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hilton? Okay.
Thank you. Commendations to CAPRI and Dr. King and the group. Excellent presentation. Augustown is very special to me. Very, very, very special. And I had to travel from far to get here this evening because I think this study was so important. So I want to say something and ask a question at the same time. I think it's a fluke what really happened in Augustown to some extent. We had persons like a Fitz Bailey, who I think is one of the finest policemen. We had political persons like Venetia, Audley, Aubin Bartlett, who really had no time for encouraging criminality. My first involvement with Augustown is when a youngster, and Kenneth, you remember, Hermitage and Gola had a problem. One boy box a boy, and before you know it, the other one bring a gun, shoot another one, and a gang war started. And some people from Goldsmithville called me and says, Mr. Comrade Hilton, a little old lady died last night from a heart attack because of the gunfire. And I thought to myself, I was a caretaker at the time, I could not stand by and allow such a thing to happen without doing anything. And I went to Professor Barry Shevans, bless his soul. And I said, Prof, how do I deal with this? I'm a businessman, I know nothing about this criminal business. And he says, look here, call a meeting with all of the stakeholders in Augustown, meaning the youth, corner youth. You remember Kenneth? At his office. And this was my first experience sitting in an office at the university. I don't know if you were there yet. You weren't there at Venetia. And hear youngsters bare their soul. It was the first experience for me. But at the end of a 4-hour discourse, they all agreed they're going to stop the firing of the guns. That's in essence that's what came out of the discussion. We had the speech agreement and so on. But I believe CAPRI, this study, I don't know if the question of the youth involvement and the corner youths, superintendent spoke about it. I believe it was an important element and to some extent a missing element in how we fight crime in Jamaica. We sometimes, don't remember the name, Weeks, spoke about defining gangs. A lot of these youths are really just misguided youths who really need a sense of direction. And I can go through a lot of things that we did, but one of the things that we offered the youths is an alternative. We said, look, if we got the students from the university to live in Augustown, then you can rent a back room at your mother's house, get some additional income. They will support your dances. They will have money to buy, that will spend in the shops, the wholesales. So we kind of give them an alternative to violence. This cannot happen if there's gunfire in the community. And there's a lot of whole host of things. Kenneth Wilson could write a book or two about it. But one of the things I believe is we had an excellent collaboration with various people, the university, we had the police. I remember we had a policeman down there who used to disrespect the people. And we had to go to SSP Bailey and said, this commanding officer, he has no respect for the people. And the police, they removed him. And they put another policeman. The people felt respected. Venetia, I remember those efforts. People felt that the police was giving them some regard. And I'll give you two things before I ask my question. One, we had a 1-month celebration in Augustown, and the last dance on an Augustown night, a gunshot was fired by a wanted man. They called me and says, look, the police have closed the dance down. What do we do? Because it's going to create a riot. Went to the assistant commissioner, begged him to put on the dance, but at the same time, give the peace builders their credit. They said, look here, the wanted man who fired the gunshot needs to be in custody. Venetia was part of bringing him back into custody, getting the man into custody. So you had a negotiation where you're saying, look, if this is going to happen, then you have to do your part. When the bus driver was murdered in Augustown in 2015, we told the people that we need to find these persons to bring them into custody. And in 2 weeks, the two fellows were in custody. I believe that the involvement of the youths on the corner, we had a meeting with Superintendent Bailey. A lot of them went to Halfway Tree to have a meeting with SSP Bailey at the time, right, to discuss how they can be a part of the solution. And so I believe those are some of the things. I don't know if the report had taken into account the real partnership of the youths on the corner, their involvement, along with the other tier of leadership in the communities. How does that play out in terms of taking responsibility for your community to bring the violence down? So that to me, I think, is a key element. Instead of treating all little corner youths as gangsters, we want to find out, are they really there because they want to? Can they be partners in solving the crime? I think that was an element that I'm not sure if the report brought that through. But all in all, it was a real coordinated, involved situation. When Sizzler got involved, I brought a man from Jungle 12 to Judgment Yard who has not been there in 25 years. And we got Sizzler involved and says, look, get involved with this thing. When there was issues, somebody could call Kenneth or call somebody and says, look, those two youths having a conflict over there, somebody needs to talk to them with the police or without the police. So really, it's a whole issue of bringing all the stakeholders together that really, in my own estimation, made Augustown work. But my question to you is, where is the young people and the corner youths? Has it come out as these youths being a real partner in the solution?
Okay, I think that's directed to Diana.
Yeah, so the report does account in much more detail than I was able to go into for the corner crews, the corner gangs, the criminal gangs. There's a classification. I don't know what Tariq's view of our classification was, but we went with what is standard in the literature in terms of how the different groups are categorized in Augustown. It's very important to understand the categories because they're very significant markers of community identity. I think the question of the role of the youths is complicated, obviously, for a number of reasons, because these corner youths now are tomorrow's virulent, violent producers. And I think what we saw leading into 2016 was an attempt to manage these youths, which was extremely resource intensive, and also was able to take place because there was a vacuum where the people who normally tell them what to do were not there. So we had an unusual situation. So yes, these young men are extremely important to trying to change anything in Augustown at a whole range of levels. One of the things I mentioned in the presentation, which came out in the research, was that these social workers were interacting with these young men. These young men didn't have any other adult to talk to outside of another gang member. And then when that ended, they go back to having nobody, and the gang members have come back into the community, and the problem is not able to be treated in a sustainable way. So yes, the young men in the corner crews are essential to be worked with in a whole host of ways. But the sustainability of the interventions working with them is a serious problem.
Okay, thank you. And the gentleman there in the third row, yes. And then there was a question over here, and then I believe that's Damien from Peace Management Initiative.
Good evening. My name is Ron. I'm from Augusttown, and I'm a member of the Peace Builders. And I'm addressing Mr. Fitzbailey. I think the police men in Augusttown or around our east, our central St. Andrew has a lot to do with what is happening in Augusttown. Because I don't believe that they put out enough effort some of the times to deal with some of the things. I remember I come out of my bed 2:30 in the morning when that little thing just started between 19 and Jungle 12. And I sit with the two set of guys myself and talk to them. And I took one from my car and took him to Jungle 12 and said, the body can't kill you because me I carry you down there. I would sit and would talk with them. And they said, okay. And Mr. Wilson called a meeting at the open land. And the thing was going. And if the police had acted upon that from there and continued to monitor this thing, it wouldn't have escalated that it gone to Hermitage get involved. Hermitage get involved with 19 and Jungle 12, whatever. And based on the whole thing, because basically what is happening in the communities, like you are saying, it started from there saying Hermitage is feeling that. They are saying to themselves that they have enough strength now can take on Jungle 12 or whatever. And it, vice versa, if the reality is that was basically what started basically in a sense from there. And I believe the police is just not, they are reactive in terms of certain things. We need more, the police to be more, because I was in Florida and somebody called me in Florida and said, Mr. Henry, I want to say something to him. I said, what? You know, send me down in my house. I'm see two men with M16 rifle out of my gate. And I look up the road and I say, the police jeep come in. And I put my mother under the bed and me under the bed. And guess what? I said, the police come and knock fist with the man and I talk to the man. So Mr. Henry, you alone could have called because you're a peace builder, I trust you. I'm talk to you. So I believe the policemen, if they play their role and play it very more effectively, Augusttown problem can solve. Believe it.
Yes, I think you should respond.
Okay, I will not deny the fact that there are issues regarding police officers. One of the things that we are trying to do is to set a minimum standard for commanders. Commanders, when they are placed. So one of the commissioner is emphasizing currently on creating commanders and certain expectations. So if, for example, a commander is placed within a space, whether it be at a what you call a local police station or divisional headquarters, there's a certain standard of expectations. A police will go beyond that. But there's a template that these are the things that must be done by all commanders. The issue of continuity is very important because we are transferable. So you have a police officer who is doing well within a space, and because of the issue of transfer, that person might be transferred and replaced by another person who is not necessarily accepted by the community, and sometimes that really causes a breakdown. I want to make a point, though, that it is important, and that's one of the things that we encourage, for commanders to be in touch with the citizens and identifying key players within a police formation as a point of contact. For example, when I was in the commander for St. Andrew Central, the peace builders, if there was anything at all, the peace builders, the political representative, we tend to constantly engage each other. Mr. Hilton made reference to the corner crew and the youth. When those 26 persons actually came to the station and we met, there was just one female, which made 27. We met and we had that discussion. There was a shooting in Augusttown, maybe 2 days after. And as the divisional commander, I refused to meet with them. We had planned another meeting, and because of that shooting, I decided that I was not going to meet with them. I don't know if you remember. And they actually made the effort for the meeting to be convened. They basically put me on some pressure to meet with them. And the person who was responsible for the shooting, they actually informed us and handed him over to the police. And that's the power of the youth. So the point is well taken that we have to be constantly in touch and in dialogue and creating that partnership with the youth within. And it's about community policing and community, which is very important in terms of the way forward. And that was referenced actually in the study.
May I just quickly intervene?
Yes, please.
Mr. Bailey, one of the things, though, that I've found, certainly from my experience in Augusttown, because police are transferable, one of the critical things that must happen, there's no information sharing on crime patterns and behavior across the community. And what do I mean by that? So a new commander takes over, and he's not informed. You might just get a report of 30 murders happening in 2018 or 2017, but you were not given the sequence of activities, how they relate to each other, and the dates. And one of the things, certainly, that we must map in Augusttown is that crime dates contribute to more crime in Augusttown. Almost every single murder we've had, the reprisal takes place on the anniversary. Always. And this, I find, has been a gap in policing in the area. So, for example, we've had new commanders taking over on many anniversary dates. We have a change in command. And when I usually visit up on the station to say, didn't you realize that this happened this time last year, or this happened a month ago on this date? They were not able to make that connection. And so that is actually absent when commanders change or staff change, and that accounts for some of the inability of the current person who inherits that crime. So that is probably to the extent to which I would want to see some, action taken in relation to the police.
Okay, Mr.
activity.
Bailey wants to respond briefly. We want to give the opportunity for more questions. There are people who have their hands.
Just
so
in terms
please,
of
please.
the structure that we have within the JCF, if a commander takes over a station, and if he miss one date, he should not miss the second one. Because we have a structure in place that identify anniversary killing way ahead of the time. And the process that we have is, one, there must be a CSB, Community Safety and Security, intervention response. There must be also an intelligence response and an investigative response. That's a standard thing within the JCF. So anniversary date, and every commander attends what you call a tasking meeting. And it's a weekly activity, and at that tasking meeting, anniversary dates are identified, and the commanders are encouraged to put mechanism to mitigate any form of reprisal.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to? No.
Go ahead with the questions.
All right, and we had the gentleman over here had his hand up for a long time, and then also from Peace Management.
I understand one of the key enablers of the peace wanted to make some comments, so if I could defer to him first.
Good evening. I want to say congratulations to CAPRI for this, using their bully pulpit to just ensure that the Augusttown thing have some semblance of understanding. But as one of the members of the community that have been in most of the initiatives, myself and my team at the Peace Builders, we're very frustrated because of a number of reasons. One of them is what Henry spoke about, the reactive nature of the police. I can stand in and I can tell you that we have shared numerous information about a number of things in Augusttown, and we see no action. But I think the biggest problem we face is that of sustainability. Because we have had numerous projects. We start numerous projects on our own. We have had external forces, partners come,
And these projects are short-lived. Transformation happen over a period of time, right? And a big part of the problem is that many of the youth just lose faith because they see something start and it stop. And something again start again and it stop. And each time you go to them and tell them, boy, let's give this a try. And they say, boy, it can't work. So in essence, we are helping to actually dampen the spirit of many of the youths across the community. And make no bones about it, Augustine problem is complex. It's not an easy, there's no one fit that's gonna fix everything. And we have had great involvement by the political leadership. I can tell you that Venetia Phillips, Andre Hilton, Dr. Bartlett, and the present member of parliament weren't people that you can associate with any form of violence, right? So that was kudos to them because we pay attention to everything in the community. We know everything. We pay attention to everything. And it is as I said earlier, the most problematic thing to us was that the sustainability of projects when they start and stop, and it just kill I literally just kill people's enthusiasm. Okay. And that is something that we have to fix. And some time ago I asked Dr. King that, we would like CAPRI help, right? And he flipped it and said, boy, CAPRI would like, or CAPRI want to learn from us. But in terms of how do we sustain these things when we started them? For example, in 2010, 2011, we had 4 murders. It's because we implemented a long-standing the zero murder, the safe community competition, which runs from September to August 31st the following year, right? And it just was not sustained. That year we only had 4 murders, right? So if the people are integrally involved, the problems can be solved, but they have to be over a period of time. And make no sense in a short-term thing come again.
Okay, that's very good comment that we need sustainable programs.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the big things that came out of the research.
Okay. Did you still want to give your question? Okay, can you keep it really brief because we have one more or 2 more questions.
Briefly.
Thanks.
You spoke to the the study spoke to the importance of removing some of the top violence producers and the difficulty in terms of prosecution. For the representative of the JCF, what are the opportunities in terms of using either proceeds of crime or other kinds of legislation where you can't actually prosecute on the actual criminal actions, but I'm assuming they must have some means of income to be able to afford guns or to direct some of the gangs. And within that context, how much of the subsequent increase reflected either their reintroduction relative to other factors that the study spoke to of helping to impact the ebb and flow of violence post-2016?
So looking at it from the financial point of view, would you like to answer that?
In most instances, the persons who are held with the guns, they basically do not have any visible means. We find that guns are basically trafficked from mostly the United States. Fortunately, whether they come through the regulated or unregulated port. And so even if you decide to proceed under the Financial Crime Act, it really, if they don't have the substance or the resources or property, it is really meaningless. We try to target the persons who support, violent supporter, not just those who support the violence, those who sponsor the violence. It is the Procedure Crime Act is not one of those legislation that is easily prosecuted. And I think there's an effort currently to do some amendment to that legislation. But we believe that with the anti-gang legislation now, we will be able to ensure that some of those gangsters are actually prosecuted, and we hope that at the end of the day, they will be taken out of the space through the legal process. For instance, in 2013, 2014, 15, and reference was made, we had about 12 of those major gang influencers, leaders in custody from Augustown. So 2015, somewhere around that. And maybe there's a relationship with that 2016 reduction. But and currently, as we speak, since this year, we have taken 2 of the major gangsters have been charged under the anti-gang legislation. And we will continue in that vein.
May I just, there's something that I want to quickly point out. Just to start with the last thing you said first, Mr. Bailey. Because yes, we take them out of the space, but there's a new twist to the criminality that we're facing, certainly in Augustown as well. They're ruling from behind the prison walls or the jail cells. And so the calls are being made to the community, the instructions are being given, and the crimes are being carried out. Also, there's a vexed issue in the community that I often knock heads with community members, including Kenneth. I know for a fact that some of these guys, they use members of the community without background in criminality to apply for permits so that they can keep events, so that they can earn money to support criminal behavior. This is known to us, but we turn a blind eye to it, either out of fear or because we don't care. I don't know which it is, but it is one of the ways that they get money. Yes, they get money from partners overseas who are community members who have left the community. And that is also a fact that is known. That is where, on that point, our international partners, we need to call on them, because it is not as though the information is not known to us locally as to who the players are internationally. But certainly at the local level, they very often do what they must in terms of these small activities that they keep just to finance their crime. We continue to give them permits, so they continue to find means to support the crime, and then we wonder where they get the funds from to do some of the things they do.
All right. And then we're actually running out of time, but there is a gentleman who had his hand up from the very beginning. The tall, stately man in the back in the burgundy shirt. Okay. Actually, there were other, I'm sorry, there were many of you who had your hands up, and I'm just choosing in the order in which people had their hands up. But I please invite you, if you have a particular question directed towards any of our panelists at the end of the session, you can always ask your questions to them. So please don't feel as if you have lost your opportunity to have your question answered just because we are running out of time. Thank you.
Good evening. Edward Perra here. I've been living in Augustown from my lifetime. I work closely with just about everyone. Let me see. We want solutions, right? We have been here barking on all our history. But let me say that thanks for the Jamaica, which was implemented recently, and thanks to the MP as well, for, along with the security forces. Ms. Phillips mentioned it earlier. But let me say this. The Jamaica has been implemented, yes, and we have seen where, and we have heard that persons have been caught on it, but Augustown have a history of what you call see and blind, hear and deaf. That continues to wrap the community. So these guys are not coming with any mask now to wear when they are going to do anything. And so what happened? It leaves now to if you will get a witness to come forward, and that is critical. No one is coming forward because they have a syndrome of a see and blind, hear and deaf. The police may have the tape, and we continue. Now, we want to remove the community from what you call a stigma because my general view of what is happening in Augustown is a socio-economic problem. So if we can remove the stigma of allowing persons to go about their business to seek an employment, and without anyone having any malice that they are from Augustown, to give them that opportunity to go about and to earn a living. And then the next point is to Mr. Bailey. We touched on earlier regarding the continuous policing. Yes, we have had changes of administration and changes of personnel and all of that. But I'm sure the police must have had a history and must be working with current and past inspectors who come there and have their work done to ensure that all of this tabulate, all of this information coming through will collaborate everything together for us to try and see how best we can clear up as much as possible. Because if we don't have justice, we will find ourselves in the next 5, 6 years still hurting and still going for vengeance and, this hurt. So
Okay.
if we don't have justice, we won't get peace.
Okay. So what I would like to do is to invite our panelists to just for 1 minute briefly give closing remarks. If you want to respond to anything that has been said, that's fine, but you have 1 minute. Thank you. Please.
Just want to say how grateful I am to share in this discussion. I want to commend CAPRI again for the research. Just want to comment on a point made by Ms. Phillips that in terms of communication through the prison, I think we are trying to see how best we can deal with that. The correctional service is a different entity. We are trying to work with them to sort of minimize that level of access to cellular phone. In terms of your statement, sir, a new commander, when he takes over, we have what we call assessment of a particular space, and that assessment is shared with all the community commander, so there's continuity in terms of that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Phillips?
Thank you so much, and let me also join in commending CAPRI and thanking all the persons who took the time to come and share with us. I want to start with the approach by the police. There has to be more consistency in terms of the policing strategies, and the policing strategies must also be ever-changing because the perpetrators also study your strategies and they find ways to beat those. And so we have to be able to deal with that. We also have to look at support system that they have within the community. And if those persons feel sufficiently pressured and feel targeted by the police as well because they're giving support, financial and otherwise, making up the telephone calls to say when the police are coming and that sort of thing, that will also stem that. But also for community members to actually be honest, what we find is that gangs actually use community members to tell lies on each other. And so the police are often sent on wild goose chases. And so that also creates confusion and it also makes policing very difficult. But it is a challenge, but it is not unbeatable if we continue to work together.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. And Mr. Weeks?
Okay, thank you very much again, CAPRI. Stressing coordination of our interventions. First of all, we have to define the interventions that we're going to use, either social or violence prevention. What is a violence prevention intervention? We need to coordinate very well. We also need to integrate as well. And we cannot achieve anything in these communities if we don't address police reform and police squarely on the table. This is something that has to be on the table. If we look at high homicide rate countries, we look at gang-related homicides in countries, police reform, not just organizational change, organizational culture needs to change, but we need to have the instruments to support police reform in place. So coordination, integration, right? We want to see the women, right, in the violence prevention discourse because they are also affected by a different set of crimes and not just homicides. And these crimes also in some way trigger homicides and acts of violence at the community level.
Okay. I think I'm just going to pick up where Terry started with the issue of coordination, but I have a very specific notion of what I would like to see coordinated, which is the commissioner, the head of the VPA, the head of peace builders, PMI, they need to talk about what mediation and violence interruption means. Because they're not talking to each other, they're talking past each other and they're talking against each other, and it is not working. There has to be a conversation about this very critical intervention and what it means to the different stakeholders, because right now they are singing from different hymn books and they need to be singing from the same hymn book.
Okay, thank you, Diana. And let me just say, I would like to thank all our panelists. Can we please put our hands together and thank them for addressing this very challenging topic. As the report acknowledges, we will not solve Jamaica's crime problem overnight, but hopefully this research is one of the many steps along the way that will bring us closer towards that goal. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here today. And please, as I said before,
Monique is going to give the closing.
Oh. Sorry, I would like to invite Monique to give the closing, but I also wanted to reiterate before what I had said, that if you do have questions, please feel free to approach the panelists. I'm sure they'll be willing to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
All right. Structure is very important to the success of any program, intervention, and those initiated in Augustown is no exception. From organized structures, we will be able to not only sustain efforts, but also facilitate the proper monitoring and evaluation of such efforts. Thanks again to our panelists, sponsors, and you, our engaged audience. Refreshments are on the outside where the conversation can continue. Thank you. Have a good evening.